Joining us now, wishes he had Wawa coffee and Wawa bagels in Cairo, Egypt, but they don't have any there because he's somewhere thousands of miles away in the Middle East trying to figure out what's going on. No Wawa for him. Eddie Yeranian live in Cairo, our man in the Middle East, a John Fredericks Radio Show Network correspondent, along with the Voice of America, CBS Radio, and many other good things. Eddie, good to have you, man.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me.
I know you wish you had this Wawa coffee like I do. Ed. You got to come back here to the...
Yeah, my brain is fried.
Okay, Edward, let's get to what really matters here. Let's start with President Trump's upcoming first international visit, starting in Saudi Arabia, then going to Israel, then to the Vatican. Kind of an interesting little triumvirate he's got going on. Also, the president officially calling for moving the embassy, the U.S. embassy. What do you make of this whole thing?
Well, Saudi Arabia, the visit to Saudi Arabia, which is part of that junket, is probably they're going to be discussing the Arab world's willingness to make peace with Israel. So obviously, if President Trump needs to discuss with the Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as the Palestinians, what his peace plan is going to be, he needs to have the other Arabs on board. So he's got to see both the Saudis and the Israelis. As far as moving the embassy, President Reagan, as I recall, tried to do that and then backed down. I think perhaps it's a good initial starter move, but when you try to put it into practice, it probably won't fly, given all the resistance from other parties. Of course, President Trump has shown that he's willing to push things through where other presidents have not. So it's possible he can make it fly. It would be a miracle, a bit of a miracle, if you were able to make a peace deal fly as well.
All right, so look, getting a peace deal is going to be tough to do. We've been trying this forever. But what about moving the embassy? I mean, why does this matter, right? I mean, what is the significance of this?
Well, Jerusalem has long been considered part of the Palestinian territories. It was originally the capital of Palestine. Of course, Palestine was under the British mandate, and before that, the Ottoman Empire. But the Arabs, East Jerusalem, which is the real Jerusalem, West Jerusalem is mostly suburban and was built after the partition in 1948. So the Arabs claim East Jerusalem as their capital. The Israelis claim it as their capital as well. So clearly, if you want to have both sides on board, it's difficult to say that that's one side's capital and not the other's. So you immediately put yourself on the line as taking sides, and that doesn't help with a peace deal.
All right, so this is the president's first trip, Edward, out of the United States. It's sort of symbolic, as you mentioned, and then certainly ending it in Rome with the Vatican. Do you like this idea? Do you think Trump is doing the right thing, making this his first trip and centering on peace talks between the Israelis and Palestinians, getting the Saudis involved, and obviously going to visit the Pope in Rome? So it's got a lot of religious overtones. There's a lot of things his first trip could have been. Do you think this was the right one, and why? Or why not?
Well, clearly, peace in the Middle East is one of the most important projects, goals of any administration in recent years. If President Trump were able to pull that off, it would clearly be a major success. Of course, the danger is, as Bill Clinton learned in 2000, just before he left office, that if you put your prestige on the line and you almost reach a deal but don't quite, things could go spiraling out of control or definitely go backwards. So I guess if it were a success, it would be a wonderful move. If it were a failure, we could look back and say, no, that was not a good thing to do. Clearly, President Trump is very confident. He is willing to put his prestige on the line. Going to the Vatican, that always helps if you're trying to clinch a peace deal between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The Vatican will, if it gave its blessing to a peace deal, that would certainly help in some ways. Of course, Israel is not going to listen to the Vatican, but it's the most symbolic possible trip of a president. So I think it was the right place to start. Will it be a success? Well, let's hope and pray that it is.
All right, Edward, last night, very late, this is what the neocons do, right? They slip this in. I think I got the wire at 10 o'clock Eastern time. All of a sudden now, it appears we're going to continue to expand our engagement in Afghanistan to fight the Taliban. We don't know what that means. We don't know how many troops are there. We get a wire last night saying that the Trump administration has agreed to re-engage our military resistance to the growing threat of the Taliban, which appears to have gained some strength now in Western Afghanistan. So what does this mean? Are we looking at more troops, more body bags, more of the same? Or based on your experience and this wire that came over last night, what do you think it means?
Well, judging by the position the administration has taken in Syria, giving the Pentagon the power to decide what the troop strength is going to be both in Syria and in Iraq, as a matter of fact, there's a clear decision to escalate, if only slightly. Certainly they're not going to put in lots and lots of troops without clearing that with Congress, but definitely they're trying to beef up troop strength. There has been talk in the media, I don't know to what extent this is true, but that the Russians have been supporting the Taliban. It's possible that's just part of the noise and narrative they put out to put us on a hostile footing with Russia. But certainly the Russians, Afghanistan is I guess a critical area with regard to a number of energy issues, possible pipelines. It's right sandwiched in there between the Chinese, the Russians, and I guess if we're looking to go to the east, it's I guess it's one of those areas that is geopolitically very strategic. So whether President Trump had wanted to escalate, I think he probably didn't, but you get caught between a rock and a hard place, and the powers that be seem to want to up the ante there. And I don't know that that's a wise move, but that seems to be where it's heading.
Oh, here we are, 12 years later. We're still in this war. There's no way out. Now we're going to recommit additional resources. Of course, you know, Edward, we've had this conversation before. There's a lot of money to be made. Every time we do one of these things, all the contractors start making millions of dollars from supplying ball bearings to water. They make money. Our kids die. It goes on and on. Here's the bottom line. Let me just ask you this. I've heard these reports also of the Russians supporting the Taliban. What on earth? Why would that make any sense? And if we pulled out and the Taliban became stronger with all of the Muslims there that are active on the southern Russian border, why don't we this is the other thing, just turn this thing over to the Russians. Let them figure it out like they failed before. I mean, let them figure it out. Let them put their young men and women in there, and they're going to have to do the same thing. For the life of me, I'm really bothered by this because one of the things that this president campaigned on is to get us out of these Middle Eastern wars. And, you know, he stacked this administration with all these warmongers. And you look everywhere you go, they all want troops, money, tanks, missiles, equipment, ships, guns, aircraft carriers. You know, you have all that stuff. You start hitting buttons and deploying them. I just don't see the point of us re-upping our commitment in Afghanistan, where after a 12-year period we've gained absolutely nothing. I mean, it's maddening to me. I cannot believe it. But it's happening, and it's gonna be.
The problem, of course, is you're beholden to your military and your intelligence agencies, and they're all on the same, working with the same logic that they've been working under for the previous administration or administrations, and whatever their perceived national interest or perceived national goal was, they're still pursuing that. The Russians have gotten into a conflict with us over Ukraine and Syria. So probably, if you believe the narrative that's being put out, they're probably giving us a tit for tat in Afghanistan, as they perceive we're giving them in Syria, giving them a hard time in Syria. A lot of the time, we're beholden to our allies. I don't know that we necessarily have our own specific national interest in Syria, but yet our allies do. The Saudis, the Qataris, the Turks, the French, the British, they're all pushing to topple Assad. They're all implicated, or a lot of those countries are implicated in Afghanistan as well. If we are not there alone, so if we let Afghanistan fall, we have our other partners there at the same time. So it's a bit of a vicious circle in order to pull out or to leave it in a stable condition and pull out.
The whole thing is a mess. And, these warmongers and the neocons, I mean, they just never stop. And you're going to get all these generals, and, they're going to love to go in the Oval Office with their medals on and be discussing war strategy. Trump campaigned on getting us out. I want to get the hell out of there. I don't want any more of our young men and women killed or maimed for nothing. I mean, they can't even tell you the strategic objective in Syria. They can't tell you the strategic objective in Afghanistan. Now we're putting out this fake news that somehow the Russians, the new bogeyman they've created, is now in somehow supporting the Taliban. I mean, that makes no sense if you look at their geopolitical position. That's a complete lie. All right, Edward, I've got a couple minutes here. French election outcome, big victory for the centrist Macron, handily defeating, over 2-1, the National Front candidate, Marine Le Pen. What does this mean? What's the reaction been in the Middle East?
Well, John, the Arab media was supporting Macron, probably because there are a lot of Arabs and a lot of Muslims in France, and they don't like the noise coming out of the National Front Party that they want to stop immigration, that they want to put a cap on the number of people coming into France from outside. This has traditionally been a problem with Algeria because there are a lot of Algerians in France, and they try to bring their wives and family members into France, and that sort of swells the immigrant population. So there is pleasure from the Arab media. As far as the economic situation, the difference, of course, between Le Pen and Macron is that Le Pen wanted to pull out of the European Union and restore the old French currency, the franc. That may have been a good move for France, but it certainly would not have been good for the rest of the European Union. It could very well have caused a collapse of the euro, the European single currency. So there was a sigh of relief from a lot of European countries that she lost. As far as the actual numbers, Le Pen is her party, the National Front Party, is the largest party in France, according to French commentators. But if you saw the Never Trump movement, Never Le Pen is even stronger in France, and left is good and right is bad. If you listen to the French media, I spent 5 years living in France back in the 80s, and being a rightist is definitely not good. The media is constantly casting aspersions on the right. That's probably due to the fact that during the Second World War, the right collaborated with Germany, with Nazi Germany. The French leader, wartime leader, Vichy France, Maréchal Pétain, was ultimately jailed. A number of his supporters were shot. The prime minister during the war was shot. and a lot of left rightist intellectuals were also shot. So traditionally, since World War II, right is bad and left is good, and that still seems to be part of the French equation.
Well, it certainly was on Saturday where Macron defeated Le Pen by huge numbers, got 2/3 of the vote. Edward Yeranian, thank you for that update as always. Good to have you with us. Good to have that little injection of reality in the Middle East. Edward, thanks for being with us